It's not that often in the world of professional sports that a player is bigger than the team. In the case of Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers, the exception is the rule. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my second Stanley Cup Finals run as host of Locked On Oilers, and I am very glad to still be here. I am glad you are making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. And on today's very busy Connor McDavid-centric episode of Locked On Oilers, we are going to cover the full scope of these negotiations. We are going to start our conversation with McDavid being the best player in the league and the gravitas and the responsibility that comes with that. Our second segment, we're going to talk about how there's not really a plan B to losing the best player in the league. And then in our final segment, we'll talk a little bit about why stars do leave and some recent history examples as to why. And then we'll tie a bow in that final segment talking about how realistic it is that could even happen, which, as you can tell by the exasperation in my voice in the previous two episodes of our show, I don't think that's going to happen. But we got to get there first. And to start things out, the world of professional sports has commercialized exponentially in the last 20 years. We operate in a world now where the National Football League salary cap is over $200 million per year. The NBA salary cap is in the upper 100 millions and the 880 some odd million. MLB teams well over 170, 180 million dollars in payroll. And we know why the NHL lags behind. The TV deal isn't as lucrative. It's not as, the national deals aren't as big and the local deals aren't as big. So that's one of the big reasons. We know that the NHL is a gate dependent league, meaning that ticket sales drive the biggest portion of league revenues. So when you have teams in smaller markets that don't sell well, or you have legacy teams that aren't selling well, that has a trickle-down effect on everyone's economics. But the first real point you need to understand here is Connor McDavid is the best player in the world. And there is a responsibility that comes with that as a member of a union and as one of the faces of the sport. It's not just about you when you are a Connor McDavid type player. You have a responsibility to your fellow players to carry yourself in a certain way and to use your leverage in a certain way. And look, I don't expect this to be a contentious negotiation. This is the best player in the world. The Oilers are going to do everything in their power to keep him happy so he stays. But he does have responsibilities, not just for himself. Obviously, a very wealthy individual, someone who's made a ton of money already, who has lucrative sponsorships and endorsement deals. It is not about the literal money. It is about what that money represents, both in terms of McDavid and in terms of the players. There's generally a consensus that when you are getting there as a free agent, especially unrestricted free agency, you only really get there once at the peak of your powers because of the way the NHL is set up, the way the CBA is set up, the way contracts are set up. Most guys get one real kick at the can, but they'll be 27, 28, or 29 years old the first time they can really negotiate with the other 31 teams in the league and fully target, I guess is the word I would use. They can maximize their earnings potential in a way they can't when they're a restricted free agent. Even when you're a great player, a restricted free agent deal is never going to be what you would get on the open market. Because if you were on the open market, there would be a team that would offer you more. But because the team controls your rights as a restricted free agent, they are going to be able to lowball you a little bit. I'm not saying crazy. McDavid still made $12.5 million on his last deal. That's a lot of money. But when you are this caliber of player, when you represent what McDavid does, he has a responsibility to the other players in the league, to his teammates, that He gets as much money as he feels he is worth, and I expect that to be relatively close to the league maximum. And I don't think every last dollar necessarily matters, but it is important that Connor keeps pushing that line along, because Jack Eichel's going to be a free agent. Austin Matthews is going to be a free agent. I expect that Draisaitl's number, which is going to make him the highest paid player in the NHL next season, might get eclipsed by what Mitch Marner gets as a free agent next Friday, depending on the team that signs him. And then because Marner raises that number, McDavid, who's going to be eligible for an extension this summer that'll kick in after next season, I expect McDavid's number to be higher than Marner's number. And this creates a trickle upward effect. And it's a natural recourse to a growing league where revenues are going to be up, so salary caps are going to go up. And to mitigate the rising cost of inflation, which that is a driving factor in salary increases, and because there's more money available, teams are going to be inclined to spend more money. Now, the Oilers are in a unique boat because of the way their roster is set up and the way their money is set up, but it is really important that the Oilers understand the additional factors here, because not only is this about your team, this is about everyone. And unfortunately for the Oilers, Connor McDavid is not as neurotic about numbers as Sidney Crosby. They are not getting him to sign for $9.7 million per year. I think there's a strong possibility McDavid simply says, I want 20% of the cap, and for 4 years or 5 years. And we talked about this on yesterday's show. I talked about on Monday's Locked On NHL with Gil Martin. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that tier of player, the Marner, Matthews, Eichel, McDavid. I would not be surprised, now that we're going to operate in a consistently rising salary cap environment, that those guys very well might say, I want a 3-year deal. I want a 4-year deal. So that way I get to free agency again when I'm 31 or 32, as opposed to 34 or 35. Because you think about where John Tavares is in his career right now. He had a great year last year, John Tavares, but it's going to be hard for him to convince a team to give him as much money as he feels he's worth because of his age. And once you get to a certain age, the overages work funny, their bonuses work funny. So that's another factor to consider as well. If you get to free agency at 27 or 28, why wouldn't you want to try and get there again at 31 or 32? And look, I can acknowledge I take the pro player position here. I am fundamentally pro player getting as much money as they can, because one day that's not going to be an option for them. One day their hockey skills, they're not going to be enough, and the game's going to tell them they're done with them. And when that reality comes, some guys like McDavid and Draisaitl are going to be fine. They're going to have post-playing careers in the sport. They're going to make enough money from their career earnings where they're never going to feel financial strain. But when you are pushing that envelope, when you are asking for your maximum value, you are raising the wages of everyone around you. And that is an implicit goal and an implicit responsibility as a star player, as somebody who commands respect and attention. And when Connor McDavid speaks, the league listens. And the Oilers would be foolish to not heed him at his requests of he wants to see how the offseason goes. And he's going to want to be one of, if not the highest paid players in the NHL. And the Oilers should feel grateful that they have the privilege that this guy wants to be here, that they have Draisaitl under contract, that they found Evan Bouchard in the draft and developed him into a proper supporting character for McDavid. And that's the way you have to think about this if you're the Oilers. You built this team, at least over the last handful of years, around the idea that McDavid and Draisaitl are going to elevate whoever they play with. You cannot lose one of the two guys you have organized your entire team around. And speaking of that, coming up in our next segment of Locked On Oilers, we're going to talk about why there isn't a plan B and why trading a superstar player in the NHL pretty much never works out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein today with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily nutritional value. Plus, Wonderful Pistachios are packed with that ultra important fiber for gut health and better for you, unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller for longer. Personally, I love the no-shell variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days when I'm here at my desk doing research, recording the show, or snacking while I'm editing. Or if it's the end of the day and I'm trying to hit my protein macros, they're a great go-to. Or if you're old school and you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein that provides all 9 essential amino acids. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are breaking down all aspects of the Connor McDavid extension conversation. And I want to reiterate what I had said on yesterday's show, what I said on Locked On NHL with Gil. The Oilers are going to get this done. There is simply no moving on from trading the best player in the NHL. We have seen time after time when teams trade a superstar player for 3 or 4 or 5 assets, it basically never has worked once. And can you get useful players? Of course you can get useful players in return. But when you are trading a premium asset, somebody who is in the top 20 or 30 players in the entire league, it is effectively impossible to recreate their impact through 3, 4, or 5 guys. And that's what makes these superstar guys so incredibly valuable. That if you need 4 or 5 guys all playing at a really high level to imitate or facsimile that one guy's impact, well, how are you going to make up for the rest of your team? If one guy can make the impact of 5, you can have such a more efficiently built roster that way. And I know this is a bit of a nebulous way of thinking because generally speaking, teams aren't thinking about this in terms of a quantity of talent. They're thinking about it in terms of spots in a lineup. And, well, if you have the best first-line center in the NHL, is that more valuable than a good second-line wing, a good third-line center, a good fourth-line wing, and an extra defenseman? And I would argue I would almost always rather have the superstar. And you look how the Sabres, what they got in return for Jack Eichel. I like Alex Tuch. I do. He's a useful player. Jack Eichel's one of the 10 best centers in the NHL. He's going to represent the United States at the Olympics next year. Was one of, if not the best players on Team USA in the Four Nations face-off this past year. Added a defensive wrinkle to his game that wasn't there. And the Sabres are still rudderless. You think about some of the other guys the Sabres have traded away over the years, whether that's Sam Reinhart. And look, I don't think Sam Reinhart qualified as a superstar when they traded him a couple years back, but they didn't get great value for him. I think when you look at things like the Erik Karlsson trade, or maybe you could say the Max Pacioretty to Vegas trade, it is very hard to win this type of deal because the value of one superstar over having 4 or 5 good players is that you have more room. And yes, can you get 3 impactful players for one, have a little bit more depth? Yes. But the material ability of that singular guy to elevate who he's playing with and to play at such a high level that it elevates his line mates, that he controls the game, it puts you in such an advantageous position because that type of talent is extremely finite. We are talking about maybe 20 to 30 guys in the whole league. And then we're talking about the best of those 20 to 30 guys. And look, I know there are people who are going to watch, who are going to comment, who are going to say, what about McKinnon? What about Austin Matthews? No, McDavid's the best player in the NHL. I don't care. I do not care. There is not an argument to be made to me that Matthews or McKinnon is better than him. If you want to say more impactful or better fits for their team, okay, that's a different, more nuanced conversation that I would be curious to see. But in terms of talent, no. McDavid is the best player I have ever seen. And again, I wasn't there for Wayne Gretzky. I wasn't there for Mario, for Gordie Howe, for Bobby Orr. This is the best player I have seen. I thought it was early career Sidney Crosby pre-concussions where Sid was explosive. He was a lot more dynamic, had a stronger stride, was a little bit faster. And then McDavid, since about 2018, 2019, is easily been the best player in the league at the highest level. And these types of guys are why teams throw away entire seasons. You go back and look at that 2014-2015 season and the diabolical work franchises were doing to flush entire seasons away at the chance to draft this guy. That's how good a player we are talking about. This is a once in every 10 to 15 years caliber player. I know it's a bit funky because in 2014, 15, and 16, you had McKinnon, McDavid, Matthews in consecutive drafts. You also had Jack Eichel in there, Mitch Marner. Those are all tremendous players. I expect all 5 of those guys, when all said and done, to be Hockey Hall of Famers. Eichel, maybe a little light. He probably needs more resume stuff. He probably needs an individual award or another cup or an Olympic gold medal. But in the conversation, when all is said and done, I think Jack Eichel is going to end up. But if you're the Oilers, there's not a package of assets you get in return for Connor McDavid that makes this work. And even if you get a superstar in return, you're not making it work in the same way, because what Connor does, and you saw this in the Stanley Cup final, you saw this in the conference final, you can put him out there with anyone and they will be dangerous. You put him out there with good players like Leon, like Zach Hyman, to some degree Evander Kane, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, he gets them to another level. And when you have the type of player that's capable of rising the tide of your entire team, you have a fundamental obligation to meet them where they're at. And again, all of this is against the backdrop of me saying I expect this deal to be done by the end of the summer before the regular season starts, because they won't want to let this linger. But there's no world in which the Oilers are going to trade Connor McDavid. It's just not going to happen. I would sooner suspect the Oilers would walk McDavid to the first day of free agency in July of 2026 than they would trade him in season. Because if you trade Connor McDavid in season, you are going to have to reorganize your entire hockey team. You are going to have to redo everything. And that's not the type of move a team that thinks it's a Stanley Cup contender makes. Even if you think, well, what if we could get Cale Makar? What if we could get Austin Matthews, Nathan McKinnon, Sasha Barkov, Matthew Tkachuk, whatever, David Pasternak, whatever superstar player you want to get? That's one guy. None of them have the individual impact that McDavid does on his line mates, especially as a facilitator. If that's the case, what is the conversation here? That we can spend the $16 million we would give McDavid better? I think you could maybe make an argument that $16 million on 2 or 3 players as opposed to 1 might be a more efficient way to build a roster, but that requires all 3 of those guys to play up to their ceiling. That means all 3 of those guys need to be pretty close to exactly what they are as is, with no ifs, ands, or buts margin for error. One guy who plays at that super high level, whose mediocre season is 100 points, 10th in the whole league in points, misses 13 games, still top 10 in points. If that's the floor, I cannot begin to fathom how you go about replacing that on the higher end. Could you find 3 guys to add up to 140 points, 130 points? Sure. Maybe you go and you find a 3-for-1 deal. You get a 20-goal guy, a 30-goal guy, a 20-goal guy, and you think you made out like a bandit because you've got some extra cap space. There is nothing you are going to spend that cap space on that is going to be equivalent to the impact of this player. This is the best hockey player on the planet. You do not trade that. Period. Point blank. There is not a trade out there to be had for Connor McDavid that would make the Oilers look good. I just don't see a world where another team is trading their best player for another team's best player. It just doesn't happen in this sport. I think I personally have always said anybody can be traded. If Wayne Gretzky could be traded twice, and no one is untradeable, but Connor McDavid is as close to an untradeable player as it gets in all of professional sports. The Oilers are going to do everything they can to make this work, but on the off chance they can't. We are going to talk about that coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. We'll check in on some of the big ticket guys who went to other places, how it worked out for them, why they left, and then we are going to tie a bow on today's show by talking about what the number looks like and why I think this happened. Be right back on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are breaking down every angle of the Connor McDavid contract negotiations. And look, Superstars do not get to free agency in hockey to the degree they do in other sports. And look, basketball has undergone a radical change in that regard in the last 10 years. Now you don't even need to get to free agency. You can just say to your general manager, you don't like what team you're on, and you can get traded. Kevin Durant's done this 3 times. Kyrie Irving's done this like 3 times. It's very easy in in basketball to get traded if you're unhappy with your situation, because the players are more valuable because you only need 1 or 2 superstars to really be a good team. If you're a Kevin Durant type world, if you're a Kevin Durant tier player, that can get you really far. You can get wherever you want. In hockey, we don't really see that often. And some of that, I think, is tied to one of the big themes we've been talking about on today's show. And the everydayers have heard me talk about this for almost two seasons now. When you have one of these truly special guys, you are going to overpay them rather than trying to rebuild them in the aggregate. There isn't recreating Connor McDavid in the aggregate. Now, we have seen this from time to time. John Tavares, probably the most prescient one, where that was an opportunity to leave a franchise that was stagnant. The Islanders were coming out of a really weird period with Jack Capuano, with Doug Weight, and ultimately Barry Trotz coaxed significantly better play than the talent that team had, beating Pittsburgh a couple times, getting to a pair of conference finals without John Tavares, who struggled to get out of the first round in Toronto during the same window that my Islander fan friends love to talk about anytime Tavares comes up in conversation. But think about it in that respect. The Islanders were a stuck team. I shouldn't say struggling. They were stuck. They were in the NHL's middle class. They were desperate to get to the next tier. Tavares put them in a bad spot where he said he didn't want to get traded because he wanted to ride out the rest of the season to see if he could get to the playoffs. And if they made the playoffs, maybe he would have stayed. But without knowing that, Tavares ultimately leaves. The Islanders take that cap space, reinvest it in other things. Ultimately, they make a couple conference finals. They get the last laugh with Tavares, who played through that entire contract with Toronto, never made a conference final. I do think that's something that's a little ironic and interesting. You can point to the Johnny Gaudreau deal, where familiarity, wanting to get closer to home, big factor for him being from South Jersey. Of course, the Jackets put a good deal together. Was it the best deal? No. From reports, the Flames offered more money. And that's really one thing I will say. Not every player is about the money. I don't think McDavid is going to ask for the max. He would have every right to ask for the highest possible number he could get. And the Oilers would be dumb to tell him no, but I do think it's not only about the money for him. For him, it's about winning. And if it's about winning, taking a little bit less money facilitates your team being a little bit better because they have more money to spend in other places. But again, Johnny Gaudreau is an example. Steven Stamkos, to a lesser degree, obviously a little bit older, not as prestigious of a player at that point, not somebody you're going to really expect to carry the load of your team, but still a pretty high-end player coming off of a big deal. Artemi Panarin, probably the most successful free agent signing of the salary cap era, somebody who has been a Hart Trophy candidate with the Rangers a couple times, who's been 110, 120 point forward a couple of times. That's the best case scenario. Panarin wanted to go to a team where he would be one of the bigger stars, a team where he would make a lot of money. Panarin was the 4th highest paid player in the NHL last year, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. Had a chance to win, made a lot of money, left a smaller market for a bigger market. And that's why I don't think there's a world where Connor leaves, because market-wise, you're not doing better than Edmonton. Like, are there bigger cities to live in that might be more desirable? Maybe, but Edmonton, for what McDavid wants, which is winning, is very amenable. The Oilers owner will spend to the salary cap every year. The Oilers have a world-class facility. The Oilers have an owner who is willing to spend money on the non-cap spending, on coaches, on front office staff, on amenities, because that's something that shows an owner that cares. And there's not a silver bullet here. No team has everything you want as a player. No team has the beach, but has no state income tax, but has superstars to play with, but has the exact... It is not possible. You can have a lot of boxes checked off with your locale. You can be a competitive team. You can have low or no state income taxes. You can have a good team already in place. But if you have the cap space to acquire this caliber of player, that's generally telling said player, you don't really have a player I can work with here. And there are exceptions to this rule. There are multiple superstars on some teams, but for the most part, and I'm speaking generally here. So if you feel the need to point out specific examples, by all means, go ahead, feel good about it. But for the most part, if you have $15 million in cap space to sign one guy, that means you don't have a superstar. There are exceptions. You know, you could look at the Oilers and say, well, they have Draisaitl. What do you mean? They have enough money to sign McDavid and still have Draisaitl? Yes. But we're talking about open, unrestricted free agency. Because when we get to July 1st, teams have only a certain amount of money to spend. They are locked into certain contracts for the next year. Generally, teams spend this week, the week of the draft, maneuvering with next week in mind, because it's the easiest time to liquefy your assets, to liquidate your assets, to turn roster players into draft picks, to create cap space, and to put themselves in a position to make moves next week. And I'll tie a bow on today's episode with a very simple thought. This team has entirely been designed over the course of his tenure around bringing the best out of him. And some of it, like Peter Chiarelli's and some of Ken Holland's, wasn't the most conducive to that. We're not that far removed from first line winger Zach Kassian because Connor McDavid needs protection. We're not that far removed from James Neal and Milan Lucic and trying to spend our way out of supporting cast problems. And it's taken a while. You know, McDavid had 3 playoff series wins in his career before last year. And now they've won 6 in the last 2. It's taken the better part of 8-9 seasons to finally find the right supporting cast for this guy to get him where he needs, especially in terms of the playoffs, where they've consistently found ways to win against good teams, where they've, I could argue, upset teams like the Stars and to a lesser extent the Golden Knights. But the Oilers are in a position to lock up the best player in the world for as long as he would like to be under contract. They are going to do everything in their power to make that happen as soon as it's conducive. There is not a world where you trade Connor McDavid and feel good about it. I do not imagine Stan Bowman wants to do that. He is going to maneuver over the next 10 to 15 days to set himself up to figure out Bouchard's contract, to set up McDavid's contract, because that's your trio. Leon Connor and Evan Bouchard are your building blocks. Those are guys I expect to be career Oilers. With those 3 as career Oilers, you have shape, you have understanding. Now, your challenge, if you're I almost said Peter Chiarelli, but if you're Stan Bowman, is to find the right supporting cast to put those guys in a position to succeed. And that starts with getting the roster where it needs to be to convince Connor that, hey, we did all of this to get you ready so next year we can finally get over the hump. We want you to be here as long as you want to be here. Let's get this contract done, please. And that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I'd like to thank everyone that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Let me know, do you think there's any world where McDavid's not an Oiler at the start of this upcoming season in October? I'll be surprised if anyone says yes, but I'd be curious to see. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.